This is Bylis. It's an ancient city nested in the mountains high above the course of the Vijosa River below, and the views over the valley are breathtaking. On entering from the north, you can see the ashlar blocks of the ancient wall that date to the first few centuries of the founding of the city, sometime around 350 BC. The city boasts a theatre that has partially survived, and among the more ancient buildings of the city there's also the later Byzantine layers with several well-preserved basilicas such as this, the Basilica D, on the way in. But despite all of that, and however it might look, we are not in Greece. Bylis was founded by the Illyrians, who in this area had some cultural overlap with the Hellenic world to the south, with Epirus and beyond. Yeah, there's a dynamic between some Illyrian settlements and the Hellenic states, which I'm not going to unpack in detail here, but then again, I doubt there's anything I can say that will stop the Illyrian stands offloading in the comments, hence why I'm making the distinction. But this is located in Albania, and over the next few episodes we're going to be exploring the wealth of ancient sites across the country, whether it's castles built on deeply ancient foundations, entire ruined cities that show more than a little Hellenic influence, and a lot of the usual suspects like the Romans, the Ottomans, even the Venetians making an appearance from time to time. But to get this out of the way, while we've done an above average amount of travelling in Europe and beyond, particularly southern and eastern Europe, I wouldn't position us as experts. Though the ever-growing collection of ancient sites we visited does make us increasingly unusual, very much still learning, still picking things up. However, I'm getting so sick of the numerous articles that all pop up claiming they've got this undiscovered European gem that you gotta click on the thing. Oh, just so undiscovered. I mean, this whole new Christopher Columbus voyage going on right now to discover it, because you guys, it's so undiscovered right now. It's Albania. It's almost always Albania. Or just occasionally they throw up a picture of Perast and roll the dice that you've not heard that Montenegro is nice, which is even more stupid. At this point, it's like assuming that people haven't heard of, like, halloumi cheese. Oh, you mean that widely celebrated cultural thing that everyone has already been told is good? That? So look, far from throwing shade at Albania, just the idiocy of the most low-effort slop articles. Regardless of how you fare at the geography round in a pub quiz, everyone has now come across, even if vicariously, the idea that Albania is very, very nice. And yeah, if you grew up in the 1980s, you might have a lingering sense memory of Albania being unusually closed off, even more than, like, Yugoslavia. But I'm really having to break the news to you that the Cold War is over, you're probably still in the process of being thawed out from your cryopod, so the lab techs can put together a PowerPoint presentation. Sorry, that's a super futuristic version of a slide projector. You're going to love Nevermind by Nirvana, and just best of luck to you. Yeah, just a deeply tedious trend. And Albania slaps. Everything you've heard is true, although there are some things you might not be aware of. But you're going to love this mini-series. Hit the subscribe and the bell, otherwise YouTube is just going to hide us and you'll never find your way back. So, we are Forest Archaic Collective, and as well as making jungle drum and bass, we've followed ancient sites across Europe and beyond, whether it's Neolithic standing stones, Roman arches, or Romanesque churches. If it's ancient, we're into it. And oh man, it felt good to do this. You don't need this background, but I'm going to give it to you anyways. Ages ago, or, well, several years, it seems like ages in the life of the channel, we made a short video on Albania just after we got to do a day trip there from Corfu. It was kind of just a glimpse of Saranda and the immediate vicinity, but ever since, my list of things to see in Albania had been growing and growing, but it was far from clear when I'd get to do any of it. So this was the year, finally bit the bullet, cooked up a big loop of a trip and got a group of friends together to do it, and over the next few episodes we'll be unpacking what we did. Before we get to Albania, there's actually some distance to cover. We had flown into Dubrovnik, and if you know your geography, that means there's one metric, Montenegro, between us and our eventual target. So just setting off through the countryside there in the very southern part of Croatia, I was having a great time seeing what were now quite familiar routes and landmarks. Given I'd made episodes on these and, you have to scrub through the footage a bunch of times over, it was quite surreal seeing these very familiar scenes back, but this time in the flesh. But also, lovely. The word I'm looking for is lovely. However, for the group who hadn't been here before, I was conscious it was an all too brief look at the country. After a lengthy wait at the border, it was onto the ferry to avoid the Kotor traffic, a glimpse of Budvar from above, down the coast to Sveti Stefan, taking a stop for a bit longer to get a look, but quickly regretted it with the almost endless stairs you have to take from the main road to the water, and it was a boiling hot day. Still got some better views of it than last time we were around this way. We stopped at Petrovac to get a bite and a breather, and all of this was under gorgeous blue skies. We're going to go over this a little bit more when we do a Montenegro episode towards the end of this mini-series, so we'll go over this more then. And after catching the sunset from the roadside, to avoid taking the road all the way down to Ulcinj before coming all the way back up to the border, we took the risk of taking Google Maps' word for it and directing us on a different route. My experience of Montenegro thus far was that anything away from the sort of main E80 route that follows the coast and links all the main coastal cities, anything branching from that deteriorates quite quickly. And sure enough, it promptly put us on a route that made Kilimanjaro look like a driving test school. Just a bumpy slither of what could charitably be called asphalt, barely clinging to the hillside, and yet helpfully only slightly less than 1.5 cars wide, such that you had to negotiate every oncoming vehicle separately. Anyway, on actually reaching the border, now after dark, waved across faster than you can order a drive-through coffee, and we were in Albania. That's got to be a title drop. Well, for now, not a lot you can see in Albania after dark. Though I did get a first look at Shkoda Castle, which we've been waiting a long time to see. More on that later. Our first day was going to be in Leisure, or more accurately, the town of Shëngjin, which is very close but strung across a considerable beach. Our arrival, for which I have no footage, was a funny affair. After some difficult parking attempts, we were approached by a guy who guided us to an underground parking garage, and we were kind of like, this is so sketchy. Like, are we going to have to pay through the nose or get locked in and our windows bricked if we don't pay them or something? As it turned out, no, there was just genuinely a guy floating who worked for the Rosheni apartments, and he was actually just being helpful and genuinely obliging. Okay, well, quite a nice apartment, though, yeah, no front desk or anything, but relieved to be in. We went out for a drink just to relax, which, great. Until I looked around like, yeah, this place isn't taking a Monzo card, is it? We had actually pulled into several petrol stations to scout for an ATM on the road there, specifically to hedge against something like this, but yeah, nothing doing. For reference, getting hold of the lek in advance or from anywhere outside of Albania is nigh on impossible. Maybe this is set to change, but possibly not. I think it's something like an economic control to stop the currency leaving the country to prevent it being devalued or something along those lines. And now we'd parked ourselves for drinks with a guy who was unusually unfriendly, especially for someone who runs a bar in a tourist-dense area. I'm not demanding fluent English from anyone, but ordering a drink with some gestures and some smiling, that shouldn't be too much of a cause for aggro. But the guy looked at us with like the same level of incredulity as if we were trying to communicate with semaphore. Anyway, found myself in a genuinely ludicrous position of walking down the strip at night looking for an ATM that just simply wasn't happening. Found one over a kilometre away, so after about 45 minutes of walking, circled back to pay in lek. Yeah, whatever. Not the best end to what had been a long day. You'll see the grapple for cash is going to be a recurring plotline on this trip, but we're here. We had somewhere to lay our heads, so great. Okay. Well, up early. Took a short swim. Even at 7 a.m, there were a lot of people out. It was pretty much as far as you could be from some quiet, have-it-to-yourself situation, but the water was a nice temperature for a morning dip. I wandered down the strip to see if there was anything that stood out for coffee. Obviously didn't go the entire 2 miles or however long the strip is. There were like hundreds of places you could have got an espresso, but none of them seemed to be doing it with any great passion or really much care. Not really any specialist coffee spots. It's just something you're expected to have on the menu. So, from this bar, it was fine. It's kind of got that ubiquitous kind of European burnt flavour, which I don't mind all that much from time to time. It's almost nostalgic, but it's not something you'd want every day. Look, if this is sounding overly negative, it was a lovely morning. It's a really nice place. It's more than a little over-touristed, but people seem to be having a great day, so great. Just an aside, for all its busyness, the Shëngjin beach is still very beautiful, and the beaches in Albania are only getting better from here. So it was a curious thing that despite the Adriatic coast being just gorgeous and a huge draw for people, I kept seeing these images of Thailand and maybe the Maldives, I think. Now look, if you're going to put this in a lift, don't just crush the aspect ratio like this. Look, this isn't even lens distortion. Someone has dragged left to squish that into a vertical space. In fact, even a few years into this, it was rather depressing to see AI art, but like AI art that had been printed onto canvas and like hung on walls. Like, okay, look at this. Did you really need a prompt to generate that? Like, it still has that trademark waxy look, and for what? Like, there's so many places you can get that shot or similar. Look, here's Studland Beach, a very well-known and easily accessible beach. Like, why couldn't you... Ugh. I will say it again, I'll never grow tired of saying it. This channel is completely and proudly AI-free. In fact, if there's an opposite of AI, it's essentially what we've been doing all these years. Rather than, hey, cacophony bot, vomit me out some approximations of houses that look history-ish. It's getting on a plane, 2 trains, a bus, and a 90-minute walk to go and visit a reconstructed ancient Slavic settlement in North Germany, constructed and curated by archaeologists who know that details matter. Go and watch the Hamburg episode. So look, if nothing else, to stick it to the billionaire tech bros who really do loathe your guts, we could really use some help here. You know, it's not been a great year on this platform, so if you could just drop a subscribe, and yeah, annoyingly, without the bell, you still might not see our stuff. Thanks, YouTube. So yeah, you're going to need notifications on. That would be a big help, and thank you. Right, well, having had to get out more cash just to pay for the apartment, we left Shenzhen and headed down the road to Leisure. Is anyone going to gatekeep our near-zero grasp of Albanian? No, please, leave a comment. We could definitely use the engagement. It should have been a short distance, but as it turns out, the road in is a bit of a mare. Just one single lane in and a single lane out across a single bridge for basically the whole town, which is one near constant traffic jam. Stopped in on the ruins at Leisure, including these vast cyclopean walls which mark some of the more ancient portions of the town with medieval masonry atop it. If you know what you're looking at, it's a kind of a funny mix of eras, from the shockingly large blocks from the most ancient layers to the smaller, more rough masonry of later additions. This is part of the fabric of the ancient city of Lissus. There's some contention over how much influence the Hellenic colony of Syracuse had here. We have written records of them founding Ilissos in 385 BC, but we can't be fully sure it's referring to the one here. Again, it's an ancient Illyrian settlement, the earliest layers of which can be found on the hilltop, where we'll be going shortly, but some impressive ancient fragments down here, and in the centre, this rather grand structure has been built over what was a cathedral, which marks the grave of Skanderbeg, a national hero of Albania from the 1400s who fought an impressive campaign against the Ottomans. His story really is one of the great and ultimately tragic stories of history. Spoiler alert.
Spoilers from history.
So I won't just mangle it into 2 sentences here. You can see the shape of his iconic helmet cast into these doors. In fact, you can see this everywhere. There's a national chain of petrol stations which still use it as their logo. So yeah, a little awkward that it's still sitting in a museum in Austria. Like, Austrians, come on, have you seriously not considered giving that back? It's kind of like Albania's national emblem, like their crown jewels. You still holding on to that? Like, I know here in England we're kind of setting the gold standard for museums not repatriating artifacts, but come on, Austria, at least you guys could do the right thing. Right, well, quick espresso, not great, but fine. Low-angle flag shot. We then headed up to see the castle, which looks imposingly over the town, visible for miles in all directions, and remarkably quiet at 10 in the morning. Seeing that cash was clearly going to be a recurring issue, I had hit up the ATM in Leisure at the earliest opportunity, but rather than the issue of no cash, it was cash in too large a denomination, as the guy at the gate couldn't change a 2,000, but somewhat graciously he let us in as students anyways. It was pretty great inside, a mixture of layers from the medieval, the Venetians and the Ottomans. There's even the cyclopean masonry of what may have been an ancient Illyrian fortress. I'm still internally debating whether to dive into that whole thing in these episodes. Guess we'll see. And yeah, scorching hot too. It was perhaps fortunate we didn't make this a very long stop, because spending much time on that exposed hilltop would have been near unbearable. The views, of course, unbelievable on all sides. Slight oversight. Hey, guys, do you want to you sure you want to put that pylon there? I mean, this is it's a pretty major heritage site, not just for the region, but like the story of the nation. It's fine. It's not like it's going to ruin the entire northern aspect or anything. So yeah, Leisure Castle, a great start. And Albania has a whole bunch of these high-up, multi-era fortresses. We're going to be enjoying those a lot. Well, after attempting to negotiate the traffic out of town, I mean, you really had to match everyone else's level of nose first, questions later. Quite incredibly, I've never seen this before. On the most congested part, crying out for a roundabout, but there just doesn't seem to be the space, we were like this close to getting stuck in some textbook perfect gridlock where 4 cars all ended up in this configuration at the centre, theoretically locking the entire town to a complete standstill. Thankfully, we were just about able to squeeze around the back of this person, but if the cars behind it all continued pushing in, we could have theoretically transformed the entire town into a parking lot. So we were on the road heading south, and pleasant surprise, what appears to be a brand new stretch of highway that allows you pretty rapid progress south to Tirana. This seemed to somewhat confuse Google, that was making a couple of suggestions for exits that were not physically possible without ramming your car into the crash barrier with sufficient force to get airborne. But funnier yet, the tom-tom on the dash of the car, this was beyond useless. At various points this week, it appeared to believe we were just in some sort of Harrier jump jet soaring across the landscape. The sun-baked countryside was kind of fascinating to watch, but probably not hugely compelling on camera unless you're going to run it as like a 2-hour video of the entire route. Eventually, we were on the main highway between Tirana, that's the capital if you weren't aware, and Durrës, the second largest city. I've heard it rendered close to that than like Durrës. Yeah. We weren't stopping in Durrës this time, but we did need some lunch. By design, the main highway does not have many points at which you can filter into the town or access its vast beach. But we pulled in here, pretty much at the sort of southern extent of the beach. The beach was not really geared up for you if you weren't part of a hotel or paying for a sunbed. A lot of it is pretty vigorously fenced off, but we had a pretty good traditional lunch from a modest place. I managed some cevapi, which I'll probably never say correctly, not least because pronunciations of these longish meatballs appear to have subtle variations in pronunciation, Balkan country to Balkan country. Well, back on the road, the landscape was getting progressively more interesting. We were heading for a site that was only signposted the tiny instant that you shot past the minute turning that Google didn't believe existed. We managed to correct, but it appears we ended up taking the interesting route up a pretty steep incline with pretty distressed asphalt. It is perhaps fortunate that it was so inclement that no one in the other direction felt like competing with us for it. The reward, though, was views to die for. When you get into the Albanian highlands, things start getting incredible pretty fast. We'll have a supercut in a moment, because just a few yards more and we were at Bailis. It is perhaps surprising this is not better signed or celebrated as, say, Apollonia in a few days' time, but it's immense. Bailis turned out to be really special. Quick supercut? Yeah. Well, the road down proved to be much newer, and again, Google not seemingly aware that there was a beautifully paved road up the slopes. It's a curious thing. When you're accustomed to Google being, pretty reliable, it's weird to be in a place where it seems to be consistently 10 to 15 years out of date. And to be clear, it's not that Albania is like super backwards. The whole thing is that the country is continually modernizing, and yet somehow no one seems to have sent any Google employees over to check. Again, I'm not a war correspondent, I'm not an Antarctic solo free climber, so no. The places we've covered thus far are never super far away nor wildly extreme. Truthfully, we get round as much ancient stuff as we can, but we simply can't afford the more extreme places. I'm still waiting on when we're going to be able to go to like Syria or Libya or other places like that. But look, we didn't once encounter this in Turkey, for example, and they're pretty fond of an impulse build. Maybe things have improved since the time we took this trip. Yes, we're working to a backlog. This was summer 2024. From Bailis, the scenery was no less phenomenal, and we ended up stopping several times to get a better view, even catching a rainbow as a storm played across the other side of the valley. It was a long drive, but an incredibly satisfying one, and by the evening we'd crossed pretty much the entire height of Albania in a single day. Leisure is right up near the northern border, and way down in the south we were now at Gjirokastër. Gjirokastër is in some ways a bit of a contradiction. It's this gorgeous traditional mountain town that feels quite small, but it's precisely this which has made it quite a major draw for increasingly large numbers of people. It's a bit of a salad of traditional streets, beautiful rooftops, but also tangled overhead wires and views to the mountains in the distance. On the way to our hostel, we passed about another 4 or 5 of them just in a small area. The hostel was, really nice. It was a traditional place that did feel somewhat like you were just staying in a family home, but then with a disproportionately amazing terrace. We nipped out to have a bit of an explore. There wasn't a lot of light left, briefly heading up to get a closer look at the castle. I remember sort of gorgeous gold and pink light that seemed omnipresent here. We drifted to the restaurants in the street. Down here in the south, we got much closer to the Greek border. The overlap of a few familiar Greek things becomes apparent, particularly in food choice. In this case, a pretty great souvlaki platter. So this was all deeply lovely. Eurocaster has very much been bitten by the tourism bug, but for now at least, we're fortunate that numbers haven't got ridiculous. It is still kind of out of the way. Didn't see a lot of public transport options there. So it's very visitor friendly and easygoing without becoming chaotic, though that balance could, of course, tip. And it couldn't have been more of a contrast with Shenzhen, a place willed into existence by tourism. Eurocaster, nothing but character and history, just a place you'd love to be. People who come here know that they're getting something really special. I just hope it remains that way. Well, early next morning, another scamp around and particularly a chance to get a better look at the castle, and we were on the road. One of the reasons I was excited to finally get these out, not just the incredible things we saw across the length of Albania, but it also gives us a chance to add to the Balkans playlist. There is a huge amount to see here. We have travelled extensively along the Adriatic coast, so there are many episodes chronicling the Croatian coast from Pula and Istria through Zadar, Šibenik, Split, and some of the larger islands, and down to Dubrovnik. As well, we had a couple of forays into Bosnia, 2 trips into Montenegro, our first ever look at Albania. We briefly saw Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria, and I didn't want to dump all the Greek mainland episodes into there, as we also have an entire other Greek playlist, but did include Thessaloniki, as it gives us a chance to also go into Macedonia and Thessaly. Oh, and a little controversial, but I also snuck our Ljubljana episode in there as well. Borderline, yeah, but wants to have some Slovenia in there too. So definitely have a watch through those. But to keep this manageable, we're going to hit pause here. We've got loads more to catch over these next few episodes, including Roll Sizzle Reel. So yeah, hit the notification bell so you don't miss those. If you've enjoyed the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes and you can catch it on bandcamp.com. If you want to flick us a few quid and support the channel, that's the place to do it. Otherwise, like I said, we're working to a backlog, but to see what we're doing on more of a week-by-week basis, follow us on Blue Sky. There's loads more ancient stuff to see there. And otherwise, yes, hit a subscribe and we'll catch you very soon.